Okay, well, you missed my intro, recorded people, but thank you all for coming and devoting some of your time tonight to talk about the craft of writing. I am, as I said earlier, Wendy Wimmer, and I am an editor by day and a creative writer and creative editor and kind of grudging editor writer by night and weekends and during lunch hours, which I think many of us are. So I have kind of a formal presentation where we're going to kind of talk about the zeitgeist or the ideas of first pages in general. But otherwise, if you have a question, if you have any like observations, feel free to put it in the chat. And I also have a poll on the side. It looks like we've had a lot of participants already of the poll, 24 out of 39. So if you go down to the polls option at the bottom of Zoom, you can start taking that poll. But if you have any questions, put them in the chat. We'll have a Q&A at the end. And then if you stick around, we'll do live first pages. So if you have a first page, you can share it with us. I've got a huge queue of them already that people sent in. But as I was telling Tommy, you got me until I'm falling asleep. I will keep doing first pages. So we'll do them one, first come, first serve, and we'll just keep going until, I lose my voice. So, I'm sorry? I didn't hear it. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen, and I have a little bit of bookkeeping stuff to get through. There we go. All right, so first of all, as mentioned, please mute your mic, just because sometimes there can be a lot of echoey, weird, tinny stuff going on, and with 30 plus people here live in the room, we want to reduce that. We will have Q&A at the end of the slide deck, but if you have a question that you don't want to miss, just drop it in the chat. I'll scroll back. We love to see your face, but as I mentioned, we are recording this. Now, I'm not sure yet how we're going to do the recording. It may just go out, to be used in pieces for the org. I'm not sure if we have hosting ability on the website yet, but my goal is maybe to put it up on YouTube, and then those people who actually registered can come back and rewatch it, or if they missed it, if they had to work, they can rewatch it. But so it is being recorded. If you don't want to be on camera, I totally get it. That is absolutely fine. No judgment. Not all of us have good hair days too. We're going to use the chat feature as much as you'd like. Use it throughout. I'm going to give you as much energy as you can give me. So very much love an interactive discussion. I get sick of my own voice a lot, and I really hate listening to it on recording. So the less you hear of my voice, the happier I am. So please feel free to participate. There is also a closed captioning API. Anybody who has the API token, I have set up a closed captioning option that hopefully is running correctly. There's the API. You can load it into your API reader of choice and use it that way. There will also be after the fact, there will also be a transcript available as well. All right, so just a FYI, some of these things are visible to everybody, and some of these things are in the process, but we have a bunch of upcoming Friends of the Brown County Library Untitled Town events coming up. First off is April 5th, Kate Washington. She's the author. She's been in New York Times. She's been on Good Morning America. She is the author of Already Toast. It's a memoir about caregiving and burnout in America. That is coming up on April 5th. I'll be in conversation with her for that, and she's amazing. It's an incredible book, incredibly meaningful, and it just came out in paperback. So you have that that as well coming up. On May 17th, writing for the Wisconsin Writers Association Press with Lisa Lickle. Lisa is an Untitled Town. I can hear something. Not sure where. All right, I'm going to mute some folks. Sorry about that. If you have a question, though, please do use the chat. On June 11th, we have Be a Good Steward of Your Story with Christy Craig. She's another Untitled Town alum. Now, those are both virtual sessions. The rest of these are in person. So here in Green Bay. So May 25th, we have the Untitled Town Page Turners Book Club. That will be in person at, I think, the De Pere Library. Then on September 13th, Peter Guy will be in town for his book launch. And we will also have Walking in the Shadow of History and the Great Green Bay Fire with David Siegel. He's a fireman here in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and he's going to be doing an actual walking tour of Green Bay and showing the path that the fire of 1880 took through the town in real time. So you can go along with him. It's actually fascinating. I have his book someplace. I did not think I'd be into like a real history of Green Bay Fire Department book, and it was incredible. And David always likes to tell the story he was telling you about the book. And I said, actually, one of my ancestors was a fireman. And he said, what was your ancestor's name? And I told him, and he opened up and he's like, page 74, is this your ancestor? And he actually had the picture of my ancestor, who I'd never seen, in his book. So that was fun. So I had to buy the book because it had a picture of my great great uncle in it. So he'll be doing that. And then on September 29th, we have a workshop, Poetic Affirmation Cards, and that's with Emily Lindeman and Bethany Spalding. Bethany is a songwriter. Emily is an award-winning poet. And they will be doing, again, in person at the Brown County Central Library, a workshop. We have more events coming. I just don't have all of them published yet. So there are more things happening. If you are not sure, just visit UntitledTown.org, sign up for our mailing list, or you can also follow Untitled Town's Facebook page to stay on top of all of those events. All right. So a little about me. I'm Wendy Wimmer. You can reach me on Twitter or Facebook. A little bit about me in the background, creative stuff. I was most recently the fiction editor at Witness Magazine. In the past, I'm actually still on Barrel House's staff, but I was assistant fiction editor at Barrel House, assistant editor at Cream City Review, and the fiction editor at Sheep's Head here at UWGB. I've had work placed in many literary journals. This is actually an old slide. There's more. And I also have a book coming out October 6th called that is all just short fiction stories. So if you would like to pre-order that, this big giant dinosaur QR code will take you right to the lion's mouth where you can order that as well. And it's coming out by Autumn House Press. But enough about me. Let's talk about first pages. How do we do it? How do we do it without crashing and burning? Let's start with some first lines. This one's famous. You probably, I'm obscuring for a minute where these are coming from, so you can just kind of understand them on your see how you feel about them as an opening. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. What do we think that book's about? This is the beginning of a novel.
Maybe some romance there.
Some romance, absolutely some romance, right? It's not going to be a horror movie, right, Randy?
Isn't it Jane Austen?
It is. It is Jane Austen. Spoilers. It absolutely is Jane Austen. But we know this book's about romance, right? It's going to be about, and we'll look at this a little closer in a minute. Good. All right. So you guys get the idea. Here's another one. You better not never tell nobody but God. We just got harder, didn't we? What is this book going to be about?
A big secret.
A big secret. Oh, yeah. Big time. Thriller, Jenny said. Tanya said keeping secrets. Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's some character coming through here, right? With linguistics. So we can see that. Crime. Oh, yes. Definitely. Definitely.
The color purple kind of thing.
It actually is the color purple. Wow, yeah, you are okay. 2 for 2.
Yeah.
2 for 2. So very different vibe than our Jane Austen quote, right?
Yes.
I mean, it is a truth universally acknowledged is a very different vibe than you better not tell nobody but God. All right, here's another one. He, for there could be no doubt of his sex, through the fashion of time, did something to disguise it, was in the act of slicing at the head of a Moor, which swung from the rafters. And of course, a Moor is a person from the Moors, a Moorish person. What do we think this is about?
Soldier.
A soldier. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. Anybody else?
The Crusades.
The Crusades, yes, definitely sets a time, right? It's a set time setting is coming in there. Adventure, historical. Beth said historical. Maggie said adventure. Good, good. All right. Anybody else?
This first line about, for there could be no doubt of his sex, the fashion, like that is interesting to me. It makes me wonder if there isn't going to be some element of gender identity in the story.
Oh, Amanda, you are so on it. Yes, yes, there's definitely a big gender identity issue in here. Definitely. Well done. You can tell you're a good reader, Amanda. And I'll reveal what that is in a second. How about this one? 124 was spiteful.
Perhaps he's in mourning for the trenches.
This one's harder. Stephen King, Jenny. I'm not sure if Jenny is saying this is the previous quote or this one, but it does have a King vibe, I will say. There's definitely a King vibe. And I think, Jenny, you are super on the nose there, because I will say it is a ghost story. Jessica said sci-fi vibe or cyberpunk, Beth said. Interesting. All right. How about this one? This one's a full paragraph. My name is Mary Catherine Blackwood. I am 18 years old and I live with my sister Constance. I have often thought that with any luck, I could have been born a werewolf, because of the two middle fingers on both my hands are the same length, but I have had to be content with what I had. I dislike washing myself and dogs and noise. I like my sister Constance and Richard Plantagenet and Amanita phallides, the death cap mushroom. Everyone else in my family is dead. So there's a lot in there. This was the first paragraph rather than the first sentence, because I felt like my name is Mary Catherine Blackwood wasn't enough. It's really this whole kind of movement in this introduction. So we have a voice. We know it's told by Mary Catherine Blackwood. Sounds like YA fantasy. Interesting, Jenny. You're not necessarily wrong.
It's historical with Richard Plantagenet, I would think.
It is. We know that Richard Plantagenet is probably dead, right? So it's not like, you know, at the same time. There's stuff about werewolves and poison mushrooms, but she hates dogs. And there's something kind of juvenile about this voice, right? We know that she's 18, but also she dislikes washing herself, which is like what like a 9-year-old would say. Everyone else in my family is dead. So we have that right after her liking the death cap mushroom. And Beth T has got it. Hopefully you didn't Google Beth, but you're just that. I've decided, I believe that you are the best well-read reader, because you have it. It is in fact by an author whose last name is Jackson. All right, so 124 was spiteful. That's from Toni Morrison's Beloved. And of course, that is a ghost story of a sort. A lot of violence, a lot of trauma, a lot of class and race inequity. Just incredibly well wrought. Arguably one of the best modern novels there is. Then this one's from Virginia Woolf's Orlando, 1928. And we can see that there is definitely a different vibe, right, in how it's been written. So it's definitely a little bit more antiquated. And Amanda was guessing very correctly. Orlando definitely has some gender flip-flops. The character of Orlando is told by Queen Elizabeth that he should not age, and he doesn't, but he definitely changes gender several times throughout his entirely long life. Jessica said, juvenile voice, but smart, knows the scientific name. I think we're talking about Mary Catherine here. And yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well read. You better not never tell nobody but God. Again, correctly guessed. Alice Walker, The Color Purple, 1982. Very voicey. Definitely one just swamped in secrets. Just so many secrets with a very large overarching religious tone to it. This is a very pointed first paragraph. You read the Jackson book for book club. It's a short read. It is a truth universally acknowledged. That, of course, is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, 1813. If you're watching Bridgerton right now, you're very much in this vibe of how urgent it is to spend the entire season of a show, waiting for one couple to get married and make a match, as they said in Austen terms. And so what do they have in common? They all establish the tone of the book instantly. You know what this book is going to be about. It starts to reinforce the rules of the book. You better not tell nobody but God. You know what the rules of this narrator is already walking into the door. We usually have conflict. I mean, death cap mushrooms, werewolves, and my whole family is dead. You can spend the next 100 pages unpacking that. There's also some level of character work, not always, but you can definitely tell that the narrator of the Mary Catherine Gallagher's book, not Mary Catherine Gallagher, Mary Catherine Blackwood. Mary Catherine Gallagher is a Saturday Night Live character. You can definitely tell she's a very different narrator than Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice narrator. So we definitely have some voice happening. And we have a hint of what the story is to come. It's telling us what it's all about in kind of a sly way. Shirley Jackson's We Have Always Lived in the Castle, of course, is Mary Catherine Blackwood. And everything you need to know about this book is actually in the first paragraph. It's just not obvious. But you see that Constance is the most important person to her. And she hates dogs and noise, and she wishes she'd been born a werewolf, and she knows exactly what mushroom is poisonous. It's actually a fantastic exercise in writing. If you are a writer and have any interest in building conflict or tension, this is basically a how-to book on how to do that. So, yeah, she hates dogs. Yes, it right. She's conflicted right within herself, right? Werewolf. She wants to be a werewolf, but she hates dogs. The whole thing is just fascinating. And this really comes down to the first page is like the first date. It's that first moment of meeting. You're kind of creating a romance with your writer, and you're wooing them to turn the page. Or I'm sorry, with your reader, you're wooing them to turn the page. You're hoping for that first kiss, right? You try to get to the halfway point. So you need to, with an editor, your editor is going to be your hardest, or the agent even in many cases, is going to be one of your hardest reads to get to that first kiss. They are jaded. They have been on so many Tinder dates. They are tired of it. They are going to swipe left, and that's not the swipe left you want. So you need to get from so to oh my God in the first page. You need to keep going. So you need to try to engage the suspension of disbelief. And hopefully that's not a weird phrase. Hopefully, does everybody know what a suspension of disbelief is? I see some nods. All right, well, suspend, in case you're like, I'm worried nobody else is saying they don't know, so I won't say it. So suspension of disbelief is just trying to get to that place where we believe in the world of the piece. And sometimes if it's a very natural flow of book, like maybe it's set now and it's, the writer doesn't have to do a lot of work trying to get you to believe that it is now, that's an easier sell than somebody who's maybe writing a space opera about cowboys set in the year 4000. So you're going to have to do a lot more work to get to that suspension of disbelief. You're going to try to use the now of the story to pull yourself in, pull the reader in as quickly as possible. That's one of the tricks. And ideally, your first page should reveal the core character and what the struggle is overall. So we talked about Pride and Prejudice, and here's the actual first page. Now this is a little bit, and again, it's over 200 years old, so we'll just take that as fast things come out in and out of fashion. So there's a couple of aesthetic things that Austen is doing here that we're kind of going to gloss over. But basically, is this first page relevant to the story? Yes. Mr. Bennet and Mrs. Bennet want, and it's not on this first page because it's kind of short, but if this were like the first 250 words, which is what you'd send to an editor, they want their daughters to be married. And while Lizzie, who is our main character in Pride and Prejudice, isn't actually introduced until a page later, when Mrs. Austen said, Lizzie is not a bit better than the others, and I'm sure she is not half as handsome as Jane, nor half so good-humored as Lydia, but you are always giving her the preference. So that's a little clue to our reader that we feel sorry for Lizzie. Her mother doesn't like her that much, but her father sees something in her, right? So that's kind of setting, we got some character work happening there. And of course, the immediate conflict is Mr. Bennet doesn't want to deal with it, doesn't want to talk about the new handsome, rich guy who moved in down the lane. Mrs. Bennet does. So we immediately have conflict. Paragraph 1 and 2 tell us why they're having this conversation. They have daughters. And what's at stake? Well, somebody's going to get to Mr. Bingley first, the guy who's just let Netherfield. So we have to worry about it. We have to care. We have to keep going. Now, maybe more modern readers aren't into that. They're like, okay, too slow to start. So arguably, it's a tougher, if you were to read like The Duke and I, which is the first book of the Bridgerton series, the first page is very different. All right, here's another one. And this is, I lived in Las Vegas, and so I had to include a Las Vegas story. We were somewhere around Barstow on the edge of the desert when the drugs began to take hold. I remember saying something like, I feel a bit lightheaded. Maybe you should drive. And then suddenly there was a terrible roar all around us. And the sky was full of what looked like huge bats, all swooping and screeping and diving around the car, which was going about 100 miles an hour with the top down to Las Vegas. And a voice was screaming, holy Jesus, what are these goddamn animals? And then it was quiet again. My attorney had taken his shirt off and was pouring beer on his chest to facilitate the tanning process. What the hell are you yelling about? He muttered, staring up at the sun with his eyes closed and covered with a wraparound Spanish sunglasses. Never mind, I said. It's your turn to drive. I hit the brakes and aimed the great red shark toward the shoulder of the highway. No point in mentioning those bats, I thought. The poor bastard will see them soon enough. All right, there is so much to unpack here. So what is this novel actually going to be about? Two men go to Vegas and they basically take drugs the entire time and think about the American dream. That's what the whole novel's about. Spoiler alert, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. It's a lot of pages about that. So knowing that, is this first page relevant? Pretty much, right? We are in the car going 100 miles an hour. There's freakish bats in the sky. An attorney's pouring beer over his bare chest. We don't know how he's in a car doing drugs with his attorney, but I kind of want to know. So imagine how this would be different if we had started this story with him meeting his attorney or convincing him to go to Las Vegas. Very different vibe. We don't have as much conflict. So what's at stake immediately? One or both of them could die. They could crash in the desert. Do we care? Well, we don't want to see them die, or maybe we kind of do want to see them die, which is also an accurate reason to keep reading. Let's look at another one. This is actually the manuscript of Ellison's Invisible Man. And it's a prologue, so a little bit of a cheat. I am an invisible man. No, I am not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids. I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible, you see, simply because people refuse to see me. I am not complaining, nor am I protesting either. It is sometimes advantageous to be unseen, although it is most often rather wearing on the nerves. Then too, you're constantly being bumped against by those poor vision, or again, you often doubt if you really exist. You wonder whether you aren't simply a phantom in other people's minds, say a figure in a nightmare which the sleeper tries with all his strength to destroy. It's when you feel like this, that out of resentment, you begin to bump people back. And let me confess, you feel that way most of the time. So this is a book about systemic racism during a time in the US when it was really terrible. Like, so is this first page relevant to the story? The man is a Black man. Absolutely relevant. Do we know who the main characters are? I'm guessing it's the Invisible Man. Spoiler alert, he never actually has a name in the story. He's the Invisible Man. The conflict is he's invisible. He's unseen by most people. The stakes are, you can tell, you can feel his depression. You can feel his urgency. You can feel how he is, I don't even want to say frustrated because that's beyond, but to the point where he doesn't even really believe that he exists anymore, just this intense alienation. Why do we care? I mean, we have to, otherwise we have to, basically we reveal something about ourselves that is just absolutely inhuman. Here's another one. This is a short story. So it's one of my favorite, I call it one of my, I'm going to say there are now 3 perfect short stories that I've come up with. And this is one of them. And this is from a collection called Tabloid Dreams by Robert Roland Butler. And it begins with this. I can never quite say as much as I know. I look at other parrots and I wonder if it's the same for them. If somebody is trapped in each of them, paying some kind of price for living their life in a certain way. For instance, hello, I say, and I'm sitting on a perch in a pet store in Houston. And what I'm really thinking is, holy shit, it's you. And what's happened is I'm looking at my wife. So what's the story about? It's called Jealous Husband Returns in Form of Parrot. So this guy is a jealous husband and he has come back. He's been reincarnated as a parrot and his wife sees him in a pet store. So do we know who the main characters are? Yeah, it's the parrot and his human wife, his human widow. The conflict, he is trapped inside a parrot body. He can't talk. All he can say is hello. The stakes are that he is trapped inside a parrot's body. A lot at stake. Do we care? Yeah, I want to read more. Like, he is trapped inside a parrot's body and we know he's the jealous husband. So I kind of want to see him be destroyed by it, but I also kind of feel it's a beautiful, beautiful short story. All right. So we went through a couple of them from classic literature. Does anybody have any questions so far? Sandy,
Yes.
do you have any questions?
No, I had a lot of trouble finding my link and I'm sorry I'm in late.
Oh, okay. Sorry, you had come in showing up as unmuted right then, so I thought I just
Okay, then I unmute it. Okay, so I'm gonna mute again. Okay.
All right, cool. Awesome. Okay. So what these things all have in common is they are directly relevant to the story. They should hint at or reveal the larger conflict. Sometimes the larger conflict isn't the one that matters. For instance, Lizzie Bennet's conflict that her parents care about is that she is unmarried. But in the course of the show, spoiler alert on the 200-year-old novel, spoiler, Lizzie gets many marital offers. Well, she gets 2. And she could probably have a 3rd if she really wanted to. But she doesn't take them. So the conflict isn't that she needs to be married. The conflict is she wants to be married for love. And that's the conflict. And then the bigger conflict is she's kind of in love with this guy who's kind of awful. Hence the Pride and Prejudice part of the story. It's going to show what's at stake. It's going to hint at the primary character. And then it's going to show why the character cares about the conflict or why they think they care about the conflict. For instance, in the first chapter of Pride and Prejudice, we learn that if one of the daughters doesn't marry a rich man because they don't have any sons, the mother will be cast out of her home if her husband should die, because it gets, because of the laws of the time, it's going to get handed down to his next male heir. So we get some kind of sense of that. So this is all well and good, right? But it's like, but what about my work? What about my work? What about this in action? Well, let's talk a little bit more. I have one more short story that it's not my perfect short story, but I want you to think about that with this lens as we read this one. This is from Melinda Falling by Jinsey Willett. It's from a collection called Jenny and the Jaws of Life. The first time I saw her, Melinda was in midair, just below the summit of a long, winding staircase on her way down. There were 3 other women on the wide carpeted stairs. 2 were prettier than Melinda, and all more chicly dressed. Cocktail party, Newport, lawyers, bankers, brokers. But Melinda eclipsed them all, descending, as she did, by somersault and cartwheel. She was upside down when I first caught sight of her, left profile to me, splayed hands poised above the stair upon which the uppermost chic woman was standing, long black skirt accordioned around her hips, plump pink face partially obstructed by a curtain of brown hair. I thought, oh my. Her right foot came down first, glancing off the edge of a step, snapping free the golden heel of her plastic shoe, and momentarily upright she pivoted and went down the rest of the way sideways, arms and legs extended like spokes. She wheeled in a stately fashion between the 2 other women who stood motionless as handmaidens in a frieze, watching her. All watched her, all held their breath. She whirled in dignified silence, broken only by the soft thuds of her hand and foot on the thick red carpeting. She did not exactly defy gravity, but mastered it by the perfect rate of descent, so that for an instant the hem of her skirt ebbed and flowed with tantalizing discretion. Whew! How can you make falling down a staircase sexy, but somehow Jinsey Willett did it? You have to love that. So we have conflict, we have stakes. Is she going to be okay? We have competition in the sentence 2. Why does Melinda's attractiveness matter? The narrator's voice. Oh my, they're fussy. And appearances are important. We think Melinda will survive, but because she tells us, the narrator tells us in first sentence, this is the first time. But by the end of paragraph 1, we learn that this is the moment when the narrator falls in love with her. And of course, we have to keep reading. Why is he falling in love with this absolute wreck of a person? One of my favorite novels, John Irving's The Prayer for Owen Meany, starts much the same way. I am doomed to remember a boy with a wrecked voice, not because of his voice or because he was the smallest person I ever knew, or even because he was the instrument of my mother's death, but because he is the reason I believe in God. I am a Christian because of Owen Meany. That is one sentence. That is the first sentence. This is a 600-page novel, and it introduces you to the internal cognitive dissonance and everything, every conflict of this entire novel. He is a boy with a wrecked voice. He is the reason the narrator believes in God, and he kills the narrator's mother in the first sentence. And of course, sentence 2 kind of meanders. He does, it's very Irving to meander around. Sentence 2 kind of goes and does backs, or sentence 2 is really long, but paragraph 2 is basically a gamble. He's doing some weaving. Again, it's very Irving. Paragraph 3, now he's going forward. When I die, I want to be married in New Hampshire. It's almost like these paragraphs don't really go together. And to be honest, I think John Irving can get away with this. I don't think most of us can get away with this. I think most unknown writers, the editor is going to read this and go, next. So now to some stories that I've actually picked. How are we doing on time? Okay. Here's some stories that I've actually picked. This is called December 1993 for Witness. I published this in Dark Holiday, so it was an entire holiday-based issue. It is a late night in the commuter lot around Route 10. The cold moon and the fluorescent lights paint our faces dead blue. We crowd the bed of pickup trucks with crocheted blankets on our laps. We pass around Herbie joints and glistening liquor bottles. My best friends wear Santa hats and snowflake earrings. We smell like campfires and Christmas cookies and fruity vodka. A missing poster of that girl from the next town over is tacked onto the telephone pole. Wind rustles the edges of the poster. Something's not right. So right away, we know like something bad is going to go down. And if we keep reading, we learn that the narrator looks just like the missing girl or looks very similar to the missing girl, and we must keep reading. And this is a literary, journal, so it's the rules are a little bit different. We have a little bit more wiggle room, but we're still grabbed by the end of the first paragraph. Another one, this is Amber Wheeler-Bacon, and by the way, she just won a big award. I not only did I publish this as soon as I read it, this is one that I knew I was going to publish before I got to the second page, and I also nominated this for a push cart. They call me crazy here. To stay out of jail, my county appointed lawyer and I agree. Yes, I'm crazy. The food at least is better in the hospital. Didn't take a shit for days last time I was in jail, partly because I didn't eat and partly because of how am I supposed to do business with nothing but a curtain between me and 100 other women. So I'm here at the hospital when the rivers begin to flood. The Lumber and the Petey and the Waccamaw rivers are flooding in North Carolina, and the flooding will soon reach me, only I don't know it yet. I don't know the governor has called for evacuating the hospital. I don't even know it's raining and has been raining for days because I don't have a window. I only know I miss my baby. This is an intense story, and the stakes, and it's all about conflict and raising conflict. Every single paragraph raises conflict, right? She's in jail. She's in the hospital. And at the end of the first paragraph, the river's flooding. All right. And then she plays the same trick in the second paragraph, talking about the river flooded. The last sentence, I only know I miss my baby. There's like a hook at the end of every single paragraph. You have to keep it, what baby? What baby? Is the baby in the hospital? I don't know. And then you read the third paragraph. My baby has dark hair and dark eyes. My baby shines. My baby looks like an angel. There is a light that comes from my baby. Holy cow. And then the first sentence of the fourth, they took my baby because they said I was crazy. Well, now I'm in. I'm going to read the whole thing. I'm going to read it forever. Of course, we must keep reading. I'm getting a little behind, so I'll let you guys read this on your own, but I do want to talk about a story I did not accept. This is a story about a man who is going to get some furniture. And it's a literary story, not a lot happening. There's actually a lot more conflict, but in actuality, the story doesn't really start on the first page. So the first paragraph, Elton found the house without trouble. It was a neighborhood of sagging chain link fences and unkempt lawns, but 533 Groff was freshly painted, grass trimmed, and bright green. The garage door was down. He pulled to the curb at the end of the block and sent a text to the number Val had given him. There was no reply, but when he drove around the block and came back, the garage was open. He eased past it, put it in reverse, and carefully backed the panel truck into the drive. So, where's the tension? Slight conflict, but resolved in a sentence. We have more setting stuff in paragraph 2. But why do we care about it? In the middle of the paragraph, we learn that Elton has to move the stuff, but there's nothing really to connect us with Elton. We don't know who he is, other than the fact that he texts and drives a truck. We don't really so much care about Elton, or we don't really know what the story is going to be about. So the story is kind of flustering. The actual story really happens at the bottom of paragraph or page 2. This is paragraph 11. And I put big blue arrows. Like, you could argue that this little arrow is the start, but I would say that the big start is when the person says, I'm not coming out. And then Elton starts to try to pressure this other person. So this is definitely an example of where I think a lot of us are with the first or second or third drafts, in that we have a lot of extra stuff that we needed to write to understand the story for ourselves, but the reader doesn't actually need to read these things. And I call this runway writing. Runway writing is, if you think about an airplane, it's the runway. It has nothing to do with the flight that people experience, but the plane can't get off the ground without it. And if you don't like airline imagery, I also like brick or construction imagery. So when you make a brick arch, you have to build this kind of kind of a mold for the bricks to like rest upon until the mortar sets. And a lot of this work that we do is necessary. It's this little mold that we created, that we set in place so that the art could form. We needed it there to construct the story. And then when the mortar's dry and we figured it out, it can support itself. Now we come back and we take that wood scaffolding out. So it is necessary work. This is not waste. Another way of thinking of it is, of course, if you don't like construction and you don't like airplanes, it's curlers. It's making your hair curly. So you need the form that your hair is going to follow, but you would never go out like this unless you do, and no judgment. You know, I'm not gonna kink shame. Beth said, I've heard this called writing your way into the story. Absolutely, Beth. Absolutely. That is exactly what it is. And a lot of times the problem is that we love that. That was part of our journey to get there. We love that runway. But nobody shows vacation pictures of the runway that they took off from when they took off from Green Bay, International Airport, right? Nobody takes a picture of the runway into, LAS. Nobody takes a picture of, when they dress up and still have curlers in. So the first page, just again, be directly relevant to the story, hint at the larger conflict, show what's at stake, show or hint at what happens if the character fails or succeeds, hopefully introduce the primary character and shows why that character cares or what they think they care about the conflict. This is a quote from Stephen King, and I like this because it's very realistic. A really bad first line can convince me not to buy a book because, God, I've got plenty of books already, and an unappealing style in the first moments is reason enough to scurry off. I'll never forget the botched opening lines of an A.E. Van Vogt, a German science fiction writer long dead, who liked to effuse a little bit. His book Slan was actually the basis of the Alien films. They basically stole them to do that and ended up paying his estate some money, but he was just a terrible, terrible writer. His short story, Black Destroyer, begins, on and on, Pearl prowled. You read that and you think, my God, can I really even put up 5 more pages of this? It's just panting. So excellent point, Stephen. We're there for you. So I want to go through a couple of things that are really, really hard first paragraphs to pull off well. Now, when I say that, your internal grumpy child is going to be like, I like to do these openings, or you're going to instantly think of an opening that you did that you love that commits one of these things that are hard to pull off, or you're going to think of something that you love in literature who pulls off this opening, and that's fine. You're going to think of that. It's natural. We all want to do the things we want to do when we want to resist these guidelines. We're artists, we're better than those other writers. Totally natural. Observe that reaction in your body and think about maybe why it's happening. So I'm telling you this because, yep, some things work out really well. And there are very skilled writers or very lucky writers that pull them off, sometimes in spite of a soft opening. But the question is, do you want to gamble your time and your creativity on being skilled enough or being lucky enough to pull these things off? So with that in mind, here are some tried and true, really difficult openings. First is the fake out. What's the fake out? Does anybody know what this picture is from, this movie? Oh my God, Chelsea.
Yep.
You got it. It's Cabin in the Woods. Cabin in the Woods is a horror movie set in a cabin in the woods. And yet it starts around this vending machine in an office building. So it's a fake out. And you'll understand why it later, becomes essential, but it is a fake out because we go into it thinking we're in a horror movie. There's a lot of examples of fake outs. A lot of them have to do with dreams, like the beginning of Bring It On when Torrance is cheering and then suddenly she's naked and then she wakes up. The opening of The Road, the main character is thinking about his wife before the apocalypse. The opening of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, a man is checking up on what goes upstairs, then the snake eats him after Voldemort tells him to eat the snake. Again, spoilers, it's a 10-year-old movie or more. And Harry wakes up and then we find out it was a dream. The Fifth Element actually is one of my favorite fake outs. We've been seeing, I don't know if those of you who remember when this came out, you're seeing all these lavish high-tech sci-fi things. And then the beginning of the Fifth Element is, the guy from 90210, he's in it's in 1920 and he's in an Egyptian tomb and he's saying Aziz light and trying to find the artifact. So it's a fake out. And those work. I would sometimes, but it's really hard to pull off. And I would also say a dream or a flashback anywhere on the first page. Why is that? Well, they're gotchas. I suspend my disbelief. Okay, this is the world we're in. Then we find out it's not the world we're in. It's the opposite of that usually. Now I don't trust you anymore. Now I've just decreased my appetite to turn the page. And if I'm an editor and I have 100 to get through, am I going to give more time to continuing on and trusting you? I don't know you from Adam. Why would I trust you to not fool me again? Another one is waking up, opening a door, looking out a window. Stories that started with alarm clocks are almost, and I don't know why this is. This I don't understand why, but frequently this is a device that is used by kind of writers who are still kind of finding their way into the story. And we almost never had a successful story that started with waking or an alarm clock going off or a phone ringing. That's not where the story actually engaged. That maybe that's you where you do. I mean, it makes sense, right? How does your day start? You wake up. How does your story start? You wake up, your character wakes up. It makes sense. Another mistake is introducing too many characters too fast. Our brains cannot handle too many characters. I would say no more than 3 characters on the first page. It's just too hard. It's just too hard. We're still trying to understand where we are in the world. We're still trying to kind of get a foothold. Think of our Mary Catherine Blackwood. We have 2 characters if you don't count Richard Plantagenet, which I kind of assume he's not a character in the book. So we just have Mary Catherine Blackwood and Constance. Everybody else is talked about in the abstract. I gave an example of this where I kind of ridiculously put 1 million characters into it, and you can kind of read it yourself and see exactly why it gets to be a little bit just overwhelming. Another one that is difficult to pull off is cold open dialogue. This again is not to say you cannot, and I give this example because this is one of my favorite novels, and this is the first sentence. Where's Papa going with that axe? Okay, so all of my great readers, do you recognize this one? Charlotte's Web. Yes, exactly. Charlotte's Web. Very well, Jessica. So, and I assume that the first sentence is where's Papa going with that axe, but really it's part of dialogue. So it's got a tag, said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast, which of course is really a masterful stroke for E.B. White because it connects the breakfast with the axe, right? Since that's the whole story of the book is let's not make Wilbur into bacon. And we've connected it at breakfast time. Really artful. And I'm going to forgive E.B. White for this. Plus he gave us, Strunk and White's Elements of Style. So I forgive him for everything. That one's tough. Yeah, still gets to me too. I honestly, I sob at the end. Pleonasm is too many words to say one thing. I see this frequently because it's it sounds like good writing when you say a lot of words, but really it just kind of obfuscates and it kind of confuses the reader. They don't have a toehold to understand what's going on. Matt Bell, he calls this weasel words. He does a weekly or so newsletter. It's free. And I encourage you to follow it if you enjoy writing craft stuff. But weasel words are the empty calories of sentence writing. Little bits of filler that, while technically correct, either don't add anything meaningful or prevent you from writing the best sentences you can. Some of them can be simply deleted, while others will need to be replaced with something better. Doing so will make your fiction more concise, more interesting, and more unique. And this is his list, his own personal list of weasel words. I will tell you, I went through my 114,000 word manuscript and started searching for these. And by the time I got to the end of the list, I had gotten it down to 97,000 words, which is painful. And it was an extremely long process, but it did really work nicely. And some of the things, the word like, you'll find, at least for me, like was in everywhere. I put like in everything. Then we have what I call the automatic red flags. I would say I see these just a lot. So I call it sad garage sale, which is where the story is basically taking place after a death or divorce. One of the best, I was telling somebody, it's another editor this, calling them sad garage sale. He said, basically, if it's not better than Raymond Carver's Why Don't You Dance, then just don't even do it, which is really well said. Jenny said in the chat, Stephen King calls that diarrhea of the word process. Absolutely. Another story I see a lot of is character is sick, some character, usually an adult elderly relative, probably one that was abusive to that character. And they sit by the bedside and watch them die. Nothing really happens. We've seen those a million times. Anything heavy-handed dialogue, and by that I mean like, let me explain, and then the character basically catches everyone up, including the reader. Anything unnatural. Mary, will you hand me the paper? Here you go, Bill. Thanks, Mary. Bill, you're welcome. That's a good one. Bad people doing bad things for bad reasons. Anything that's like racist, ableist, sexist, etc., for the shorthand to do plot development. Hurting animals is one that I saw frequently because it was easier to show a person hurting an animal than it was to show them hurting a human. And there's a lot of complicated reasons that writers do this, but usually it was a red flag. And any kind of reliance on adverbs or colorful dialogue tags. And this is by no means a exhaustive list. There's a lot of other personal things that I can't stand. Anything describing women or skin colors as food is a huge one for me. Anything, there's a lot of women described as food. That's a huge red flag for a lot of editors. Another thing is, it seemed like when anybody sent in things that were weird with formatting, and these are actual screenshots that I took of actual submissions. I had another one that was all literally 20-point font, but the font was Enya font. It's like the font that Enya does her like her name in. The whole thing was that kind of, Celtic font, and really difficult to read. Anything like that, we're just going to close it because our eyes are tired. This is I included this one in here because I think it's interesting because it's one of the most famous, most popular stories or books of recent memory. And it starts out with, my mother drove me to the airport with the windows rolled down. It was 75 degrees in Phoenix, the sky a perfect cloudless blue. I was wearing my favorite shirt, sleeveless white eyelet lace. I was wearing it as a farewell gesture. My carry-on item was a parka. All right, we have a little bit of conflict there. Like, I guess we don't understand at this point, and you probably figured out what this is. This is from Twilight. This is, yes, Megan, absolutely. This is from Twilight. But actually, this is her first paragraph. This is not actually how she sold the book. This is how she sold the book with this preface. I'd never given much thought to how I would die, though I'd had reason enough in the last few months. But even if I had, I would not have imagined it like this. I stared without breathing into a long room, into the dark eyes of the hunter, and he looked pleasantly back at me. Surely it was a good way to die, in the place of someone else, someone I loved, noble even. That ought to count for something. Holy conflict, right? So much better than her dissertation about what she's wearing and carrying a parka as her carry-on. And this is how she sold the book. This is how she got somebody to turn the page and get to all of the sparkly vampires that were waiting within the pages of this book. Jenny said, would the new trend of not using quotation marks for dialogue fall under that? I don't do this, but I'm just curious. Jenny, yeah, that's it's actually not that new. Read Kiss of the Spider Woman, and you'll see that in place. I would say it falls in and out of style about as fast as like high waist jeans. You know, it's definitely a something that's going to be dated. But I also see people do it. It depends. Some people, yeah, it definitely will. Some people will hate it.
Yep. But like as an editor, like if you saw that, like, is it automatically a turnoff? I'm just curious because somebody in my writers group does this and it drives me absolutely bonkers.
No, I think it depends on taste, honestly. I do think that some editors are going to be persnickety. Yeah. Absolutely.
All right.
So now is the time for questions. And I did actually hit an hour, so I'm really excited about that. Who has questions?
Where do we get a copy of that baby story?
Oh, Amber Wheeler Bacon, North Toward Loris. And it is it's an issue of Witness. I don't know if it's on the site. I'll follow up with you, Tanya. And I'll actually, when I send out the slides, it's so good. It's so good. Leary asked, how important are chapter titles? I don't think chapter titles are going to make or break you. It shouldn't, like, most people shouldn't really necessarily absorb them because I think they change a lot. Although I'd be curious, Amanda, do you mind us picking your brain? Do you title your chapters? I can't remember. I have your thing in here.
I don't title my chapters.
No,
I
I
just
didn't think so.
chapter 1.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's kind of going out of style, honestly. I don't think most people are just doing numerical. Good question. Who else?
Well, if no one's going to ask you a question, I just want to tell you this was so amazing that I went and reworded the first chapter in the book that's on submission.
Oh my
It
goodness.
really, it's one page chapter that just has a text message, and you said something today that helped me clinch, you know what? That's what's wrong with it. I need to change that sentence. So thank you.
Awesome. I'm so glad.
And I have a question, and I came in late, and I completely agree with Tanya. I mean, I have gotten so much from just the short time I'm in this presentation, so I really appreciate it. And Wendy, I have to ask because I'm not sure. You're an editor, correct? Not an agent?
No, yeah, I'm not an agent. I'm an editor.
Okay,
So my day job is editor-in-chief, and then I also edit literary journals.
Oh, okay. So would a writer to present something to you, would they end up going through the agent?
So I work for a tech company. So I'm an editor of nonfiction. So I write or I edit tech stuff. For the literary journals, those are generally unagented submissions. They generally come in through Submittable. Most folks with full-length projects would need to query agents and get an agent if you're going to go through traditional publishing. My book that's coming out in October, I do not have an agent for. I won a contest. So I submitted it through Submittable through a contest. And I'm hoping still to get an agent. I have queries out to agents and interest, but I haven't signed with anybody yet.
How important is a inquiry letter compared to the first page?
Randy, they go together.
They go together. Okay.
It's like an Oreo in the filling. It, you know, they're always, usually the query is, you know, the query in the first 5 pages. Cynthia asks, sometimes I think it might be better to write the entire manuscript and then reproach the rewrite of chapter 1. What are your thoughts on when to attempt this? Absolutely, because sometimes you don't know where you're going. Your first page should have some kind of echo on the last page. You know, like your first page, and of course this is a bigger discussion of when in the story, how much does the narrator know on that first page? But generally most, you know, if we think about the John Irving example, that character is thinking about things that happened 40 years ago. So he has perspective. So definitely, I think that it doesn't matter if the narrator knows where you're going, you need to know where you're going. So your first sentence is probably going to be the last thing you edit, honestly.
Thank you.
Do you
There's
think
just there's so much focus on this, and then you just start there, you'll never get past it. It seems it's like
Oh,
you
yeah.
kind of need to like push and get the rest tightened, and then come back.
The plane has to take off of the runway.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I was going to comment on, that idea of, I think you can get in this loop on that opening, and you need to just let it go and
Yeah.
come back.
It's your first draft, and sometimes your second and third draft are there to tell you the story. It's not there for your reader yet. And that comes to our poll question. Our poll questions were, have you submitted work to an editor? And it looks like, oh my gosh, everybody filled out the poll. Thank you so much. So most of you, a slim margin, really, 57% said I have not submitted work to an editor. So yay, welcome. 40% of you said yes. So congratulations. And 2% of you said I'm not sure. And thank you for being honest. In the second question, what's your biggest concern on the first page? First answer, the top answer is 48% is pacing. That one's really tough. And you could pick multiple options. 45% of you said character, 36% of you said tension, which is that conflict. 26% said setting. I would say that that's depending on your piece. If you have something with heavy world building, sometimes setting is much more important. Stephen King's favorite first sentence that he ever wrote, he was all about making sure that you understood what time frame it was in that first sentence. You had to understand that we were in the 70s in the first sentence. So sometimes for me, setting, I could take it or leave it. And then something else I'll answer in the chat. Thank you for those of you who did. And then the question that I was really hoping to get to is, how much editing do you do after writing the story? What percentage of your draft is maintained? 36% of you said massive edits. I definitely change at least 65% of the text, if not more. 24% of you, these were tied. So much
Is the
editing.
poll going to be included
I
in the recording?
Well, I'm reading it right now, so that will be included. But otherwise, you can definitely screenshot it. You know what? I'll take a screenshot
I
of it.
didn't see it. It's not coming up on my Zoom at all.
It's underneath on the bottom where it says polls.
It doesn't come up at all. I don't even have that at all.
Oh, you know what? You're on the phone. You're on the iPhone. So if you don't have the app installed, you might not be getting it.
I do have the app installed.
And then I can't help you then. I'm not sure because I'm doing it on a computer. Sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. I'm glad that you did because I just learned something.
Wendy, I'm on my laptop and I don't see anywhere that the poll popped up when I first came in, but I don't have anything on my Zoom either to let
Really?
me access it.
So you
The
don't have
poll
it.
has ended. That's why you're not seeing it.
Oh, that's weird because I didn't end it. That's weird.
Well, once you complete it.
Oh, yeah. If you answered it, it goes away, huh? That could be. All right, here, I'm going to try this. I'm ending the poll. Does anybody see it now? Oh, hey, I can share results. There we go. Sandy, can you see it now? Awesome.
Yeah, it's on the screen now.
Yay. Sorry. I said it was my first time doing that. So we had 24% kind of split. 10 of you said spelling, organization, proofreading, but the story is mostly the same as my first draft. And another 24% said so much editing, rewriting. 0 to 10% of my first draft is left. I'm so very exhausted. And the smallest percent, oh, actually, there's one more. 21% said I do one major edit, probably 30 to 60% of the piece is touched. And then 2% said spelling mostly, the rest is as the muse intended, which God love you. I wish I could be that perfect. I'm jealous. Maybe you guys should show your secrets. So in terms of that, Maggie asked, so Shanna said, query letters are not fun. No, they are not. There's nothing enjoyable about writing a query letter. I do not know a single person who is like, oh, I just love writing query letters. No, they're awful. They're terrible. Condense your entire novel into 2, maybe 3 paragraphs. Ugh. It's awful. Maggie said, should the first page always include the main character? Or if your narrator is different than your main character, would it be better to establish the narrator? I think that's a really good question, Maggie, and I don't think that there's one way of answering that. Your narrator definitely should be present as an important facet, but sometimes not. So like Jane Austen's narrator is not any of the girls, it's not Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, it's an omniscient point of view, and they kind of mostly disappear. They don't really, cause a lot of problems or make much commentary, although it does get a little sassy and a little salty in places, but they mostly disappear. So Maggie, there's no answer to that. And maybe that's the question, is maybe that's the lever you play, is if you don't have the main character on the first page, try writing it with try writing a first page with that narrator. Shanna said, avoid the shock factor when writing query letters. Shanna, what do you mean by that? And if you want to come off mute, you're welcome to. Do you just mean like avoid shocking everybody thinking that query letters are going to be fun, or get the shock out of the query letter? Okay, hopefully they will add in the chat. Good questions. What else?
Wendy, this is Amanda. I don't know why I always say that. I feel like I'm at work. This is Amanda. I'm from Summerlin Hospital. Sorry.
This is Wendy.
I did have a question, talking about on the first page, the character, obviously there being a hint at the larger conflict and a sense that that there's something at stake and the character cares. I'm wondering, does that thing on the first page that the main character cares about, does that need to be, I don't know, emblematic of like the story goal, or can it be a smaller thing that is enough to give to build a sense of tension and investment, but not necessarily the same thing as the larger arc of your story, right? Like, do we need to know from page 1, okay, this is what my character wants, this is the larger thing, or can it be kind of a microcosm of their world, and then we then start to see the bigger picture fleshed out in the coming pages and chapters?
That's a great question, and I think that we can find so many examples in literature where big characters don't appear on the first page at all. I'm thinking about the beginning of Harry Potter. Harry's not on the first page at all. The opening of the Star Wars movie. I like to talk about movies because they're easier to show visually on PowerPoints rather than giving you a screenshot of a page every time. But the beginning of Star Wars, the very first, A New Hope, we start with a Star Destroyer, right? It's not, and then we see Leia at some point. She's still not the main character for the wrong reason. So Luke doesn't show up until he whines about wanting to go to town with Haji, to shoot womp rats or whatever it was, whatever stupid thing he was whining about. So I think that it can, an easy way of bringing you in is to have the main character, but also that's not to say that there is not any one rule to this. Great Gatsby starts with Nick Carraway talking about what his dad told him. Nick Carraway's dad, Paul, great minds think alike. Yeah, Gatsby doesn't show up until there's a party and he's like hanging out in the room. And although arguably, Nick changes more than Gatsby does, although spoiler alert on a 100-year-old novel, Gatsby dies and Nick doesn't. So, it really depends on the framework that in which